Our next speaker is Caleb Warnock. He is a best-selling author of 24 nonfiction books, including Backyard Winter Gardening, The Art of Baking with Natural Yeast, and Forgotten Skills of Self-Sufficiency. And I have all of them, just so you know, and more. I mean, all of the ones we listed and more. He's an expert on gardening in the arid West and has taught gardening classes for more than 20 years. He is certified in the nutrition of weight loss, diabetes, and autoimmune disease. He is the owner of a nationwide heirloom seed company called seedrenaissance.com, and you probably want to write that down if you don't know, seedrenaissance.com. Please welcome Caleb Warnock.
What did you say?
Is it all good?
Yeah, we're good.
All right.
So, hi everyone. Stand up really quick and stretch yourselves.
Once you got that where you need it, don't touch it anymore because the mic, there are two mics on it.
I shall not touch the mic again. Get your wiggles out, everybody. Get your wiggles out. Because I need you all fresh and paying attention. I have so much to say. I loved what we just heard from that speaker. Raise your hand if you're growing ashwagandha. That would be 3 of us growing ashwagandha.
Is it too well here?
Do you know that you can grow ashwagandha nicely in Utah? Do you know that this stuff that you buy at the store is from China and is nonsense and you shouldn't buy it? You should just grow your own stuff. You know, you walked into a righteous room when they're talking about probiotics and cytokines. I work with some of the sickest diabetics and autoimmune people. I own a company called the Health Agency, and I own another company called Seed Renaissance. And I work with some of the sickest diabetics and autoimmune cases in the United States, and so it makes me so happy to walk into a room where there are righteous words floating around, and people are talking about reducing their cytokine load, and I'm here to segue right into how to reduce your cytokine load, because there's only one way to permanently reduce your cytokine load, and that is to change the way that you are eating. Change the way that you are eating, and the closer to the earth you eat, the better off you're going to be. How many of you have eaten something out of your garden in the past week? Oh, you guys are filled full of righteousness. How many of you eat out of your garden in January? Raise your hands, righteousness. By the way, it's nice to see some of you here. I want to say something really quick about Kristen Chevrier, by the way. First of all, I've put together conferences like this, and it is, but you know, the night before the conference starts, you really hate yourself. You're like, what? Whose idea was this? This is a terrible, horrible idea to put this together. Kristen gets up and does something about her strong-held beliefs. I walk into the grocery store, and there is Kristen Chevrier trying to get people to sign the petition for righteousness. I mean, the woman works tirelessly because she believes that things need to change. And there's one thing to talk about change, and it's another thing to go out and make change, and I think we should give her a round of applause. So tomorrow, she's going to be unconscious all day, I know, because I've done this before. So you guys just remember that she sacrificed her life for you for the week. Who's the most righteous person near me?
It's gotta be. What do you need?
I need everyone to get a copy of these.
Thank you.
I like to just sort of back and forth with you all, so if you have any questions, just holler at me. I'm going to talk to you about winter gardening. My name is Caleb Warnock. Did I say that already? I've started this list with what to plant. In your handout, you'll see a list of what you can plant in September. This topic takes on a whole different meaning because for the first time in 2020, if we dare say that, for the first time we've had the real food shortages since World War II. The first time since World War II we had real food shortages in this country. And so that has piqued a lot of people's interest in gardening and canning, as evidenced by the fact that the canning lids are all gone and only the righteous know where to get them now. Raise your hand if you know where to get them. Shh, don't tell everyone. Don't tell everyone. There's a shortage of seeds nationwide. There's a shortage of garden seeds nationwide, and it's going to get worse next year for reasons that we could discuss. People are interested all of a sudden. Why are people interested? Because they understand that when you are prepared, you don't have to worry. And there is nothing more comforting than knowing that you have food in your garden. Because the food in your garden is not poisonous, it's fresh. If you're righteous, it's organic. You know who touched it, you know where it came from, you know how it was grown. And best of all, it doesn't cost you anything. So those are all nice reasons why you should have food in your garden. Right now, in August and September, we're at the heyday of gardening, and it's a little different in December and January and February if you want to eat out of your garden in December and January and February, and I'm here today to walk you through that process. So, I just started with a list of things that we could plant right now in September for harvesting in October and November. And that would be lettuce, especially the winter varieties of lettuce, spinach, arugula, kale, radishes, fava beans, Asian greens, mustard greens, collards. Those are all things that you could plant outside this week, and you would be able to have food for your family for the next 2 or 3 months. Then we go to, here's some more handouts right here if anybody needs some. We go to how can we get more out of our garden, because through the whole history of the world we were missing something called the grocery store. Did you know that we didn't really have super grocery stores until after World War II in this country? And I like to say that when the settlers and the pioneers came across the plains, they were astonished when they arrived here and there was no Costco. What? Now what are we supposed to do? There's no Costco here. And guess what? They knew what to do, they did it, and they lived through having no Costco. Wow.
We're doing it again, no masks.
We're doing it again. No Costco. Yeah. Anyway, that's a whole other subject. So how 20 generations ago, how did your ancestors feed themselves in November and December and January and February? 15 generations ago, 10 generations ago, how did your great-grandmother feed her family before World War II when they had no Costco to get themselves through? And the way that they did this is by planting things that needed no protection, and by planting things with some protection using an ancient technology called a cold frame, and even a greenhouse. The first greenhouses that we know of were in 500 AD. And we have documented evidence of cold frames being used about the time of Christ, and I'm sure they were being used before that. We just don't have the documentary evidence. Does anybody know what a cold frame is? Yes. Cold frame is, there's one righteous person back there. Oh, now people are trying to jump on the bandwagon. Like, wait, I didn't know. I tell the kids, by the way, if anybody ever says, raise your hand if you're righteous, raise your hand if you're righteous. Especially if you're at the pearly gates. You don't want to get left out. That's not, at the pearly gates is not the time to be demure. Like, not me, no. Yes, me, let me in. A cold frame is some kind of protection. So when we have these gorgeous tomatoes growing in our garden, which a lot of us do right now, and then Mother Nature decides to remind us what kingdom we live in, and she brings in that Arctic wind and tries to freeze everything, what do you do? What do? You cover it. That's a cold frame. We just want our cold frame to be a little more permanent and wind resistant than the blanket that you throw out in the middle of the raging storm. So a cold frame used to be, 2,000 years ago, they would make a cold frame out of a mineral called mica, which is a see-through rock that kind of looks like glass. 2,000 years ago, that's the way they were making cold frames. Today, we've advanced to using something called twin-wall polycarbonate, which is a greenhouse plastic, which is designed specifically for winter gardening with cold frames in greenhouses. And this twin-wall polycarbonate has some advantages over glass, but before they invented twin-wall polycarbonate 40 years ago, then they used to use glass. I've used glass. It has a couple of disadvantages. The children break it, the deer break it in the middle of the night, the visitors break it when they come to your house. And if you don't get the temperature right, Mother Nature breaks it by cracking the glass because it's warmer inside than it is outside. So there are some advantages to switching over to twin-wall polycarbonate from the glass, because the twin-wall polycarbonate lasts and lasts and lasts, and the glass you have to clean up in the middle of the winter. So I've put some photos of here on a cold frame. You just need to be able to cover whatever it is that you don't want to be destroyed by Mother Nature, as she's reminding you to humble yourself because you're not that fantastic, because you live in the lower kingdom. She just likes to remind you that you want to move up a kingdom as soon as possible, because this is not the kingdom to stay in. The next kingdom has no cold frames, is what I'm saying. So it's just like covering tomatoes, only it's a permanent cover. It's something that you're going to be able to start things early in the spring, and you're going to be able to cover things in the fall and let them last through December. If you have a cold frame, in addition to all of the stuff that I have listed here that you can grow with no protection, you can also grow peas and carrots and beets and broccoli and cabbage and turnips and orac, spinach and radishes and celery and cauliflower and Egyptian walking onions, which are the most important, probably the most important thing you can grow. And I brought you all seeds of Egyptian walking onions, so we should discuss that right now before I forget. Egyptian walking onions, does anyone know what Egyptian walking onions are? They're the easiest onions to grow in the world. You just plant them once, and by plant them I mean you just take one or two of these bulbs that I have brought and you just throw it on the ground and it plants itself. This woman back here is gesticulating to me. You can't get rid of them. Oh, you can get rid of them. You can get rid of them exactly the way I get rid of them, by putting them in your mouth. You're supposed to eat them. They grow wild all over. These are definitely the easy, and onions are a foundation. Not only, onions have a very specific effect on autoimmune disorder. They have a very specific effect on helping tamp down the inflammation, and there's a reason why they ripen right in time for the winter, because they have a whole healthy benefit. But you just take some of these Egyptian walking onion bulbs, and now is the time to plant them, and you just throw them someplace where they're going to be on damp soil, and you don't even have to plant them, they just plant themselves. Oops, I just dropped that one. So I'm going to put this, I thought maybe you don't want to smell like onions for the rest of the symposium, so I put some labels in here, so you can take this and put your little label on here, because I'm sure you've learned so much today, your head's probably swimming, and as soon as I get off of this stage here, then you won't remember what this is called. So I put a label on here for you, and you can take some of these, and I don't know, Kristen, where you want me to put these, but at the end of your symposium, don't forget to take yourself some Egyptian walking onions, because they're definitely the easiest food that you will grow in the garden. Egyptian walking onions, by the way, produce onions at the bottom in the ground and at the top where flowers usually grow, and the ones at the top are the ones that you seed for the next year, and the ones at the bottom are the ones that you eat, generally speaking. So all of those things, if you have a simple cold frame, you can build yourself a very easy cold frame with some, like a blanket type of thing, but if you want to have something more permanent, then you're going to need a little wood and a little plastic. This is some pictures of if you look on the handout here, you can see pictures. Not only what I'm trying to say is that you can just put this directly on your garden, or, as you can see in this photo, the ones I make hold 27 one-gallon containers. So you can start things that you want to move out later, or you can just grow it as your little enclosed garden, and it's kind of a little mini greenhouse, yes.
While the weather's warm, will it cause mold to grow since it's being watered?
So you do vent a cold frame, and you are going to water inside your cold. I mean, it's not going to be watered unless you water inside of it. Right now, it's raining outside. Did you guys know it's raining outside right now? It's a blessing, right? In the desert, anytime that rain falls, it's a blessing. So right now is a really good time to get your cold frame started, to get anything that you're planting for winter and autumn gardening, to get that started now, because the soil is still warm now and things germinate nicely when the soil is warm. That is another thing that a cold frame does, is the cold frame has the ability to trap the heat of the sun. The twin wall allows the sun into the cold frame, and then the twin wall acts as a see-through blanket, so the heat comes in during the day and does not escape during the night, and that's how you can keep the ground from freezing until well past Thanksgiving, sometimes even Christmas if you're using a cold frame, because it just sits there and acts like a blanket over your garden. It also keeps the direct frost off of whatever it is that you are planting inside. So I plant seeds 12 months a year. You can plant seeds in your cold frame 12 months a year. You start them right now, you're going to have a big lush cold frame all winter long, and if you start to pull things out, you just replace it with seeds of things that are on this list, so that anytime there is a little space opening up in your cold frame, you just fill that space and continually have a harvest. Does anybody have any questions about cold frames? Yes, in the back.
I was just wondering if you could address really quick how often to vent and
How often to vent, she says. So I design cold frames so that you can just stick a stick in the top of the cold frame and just leave it until it begins to get seriously cold at night, and then it will vent, and then it just vents itself. My experience is there has to be as little work as humanly possible involved in gardening, or else life happens and everything dies. So you vent as little as possible. It's like my greenhouses. I open the vents once a year and I close the vents once a year. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I have no other half. How much should you expect your growing to slow down because it's
It depends on when you started your seeds. I mean, it does slow down significantly. For example, right now my Swiss chard is probably this big, and in January my Swiss chard will be this big. But the great thing about most of these things that are listed here on the need no protection list, the righteousness just cut me off. I didn't touch it, Kristen, I promise, I didn't touch it. The good thing about it is that it's cut and come again. So the lettuce, you don't rip the root out, you just cut the leaves off and then it immediately grows back. And the Swiss chard, you don't rip the roots out, you just cut it off and it immediately grows back. And the same thing with the peas and the spinach and all of these things through the whole winter, as long as they've got some protection. And some things will grow if you have the right varieties of seeds. Some things will grow even underneath the snow in Utah without protection on the list that I've listed here. You can go to seedrenaissance.com and look more carefully at the different varieties. Yes?
I have two questions. Are your instructions for this online? And my other question is, how did you learn all this?
Oh, through lots of experience. Yeah, through lots of experience. I've been doing this a long time. I don't know. I'm a little obsessed with not eating out of the grocery store because I think it tastes gross. And by the way, I was going to say about the previous speaker, the more you go to the grocery store, the sicker you get. I mean, I'm not trying to be rude about that, but the grocery store is filled with simple carbohydrates and very little else. And simple carbohydrates are a great way to kill yourself. If you don't love your children, just feed them simple carbohydrates, and pretty soon they'll have diabetes and you won't have to worry about them.
All of this online. I mean, are the instructions for this on your website?
No, the instructions are right here in your hand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Usually I teach about a 3-hour class on this, so I'm trying to give you some highlights of the overview of what's going on. Okay, other questions? Yes, sir, in the blue.
Do you remove your, what do you call them?
Cold frame,
during
yes.
the summertime when it's warm?
Absolutely, yeah.
Just take it right off the garden?
Yeah, as soon as the last frost has happened, then you just take them off of the garden entirely.
Okay.
Yeah, yes?
Can you do tomatoes through the winter?
You can do tomatoes up until about Christmas if you're very careful and you have a well-designed cold frame. Otherwise, you'll want a small greenhouse to do tomatoes. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. This picture of my tomatoes was taken on February 4th this year, right there. Yes? It can be used on raised beds as long as it's sitting directly on the soil in the raised bed. However, because the raised beds are above the plane of the ground, they freeze faster than the regular ground does, and so you're going to have a smaller harvest, or a shorter harvest if you put it on top of a raised bed as opposed to just putting it directly on the ground. Excellent question. You probably have to get it from me. It's very difficult to come by. They don't sell it at Home Depot. They don't sell it at Lowe's. It's very difficult to come by. I used to do a group order every year, but then I got tired of doing that. So.
Are your seeds heirloom, and are you doing them yourself?
Does anyone know me in this room? She just asked if my seeds are heirloom. I grant you absolution for that question.
Please note on why all of your seeds are heirloom and why people shouldn't buy seeds from Home Depot. Briefly, if you're encouraging people to garden and then if they go home and they're planting.
Well, the simple reason why we only do heirloom seeds is because heirloom seeds are the only true seeds that you can save seeds from. That's the long story short. I think she's trying to guide me to say that. The reason why we do heirloom seeds is because heirloom seeds produce true seeds and hybrid seeds do not. And there's a whole long spiel about that I could give you about how the corporations are buying up all the seed companies and trying to get rid of the heirlooms because they need to own all of the seeds so they can force you to buy the hybrids. But I don't want to get all into that. What did she say? I'm not going to tell you about the marijuana. I'm not going to tell you about to buy the hybrid
Does
seeds.
that do well in a cold frame?
Probably. You know, my friend, I helped, my friend who lives over near me, I helped him. He's growing probably the largest legal crop of marijuana in Utah. I helped him put that together because he lives over by the temple. I'm only mentioning that because the righteous who drive by the temple have already noticed that across the street from the temple is probably the largest field of legal marijuana in Utah. And those of you who don't drive by the temple all the time and did not recognize that there was a massive field of marijuana are the righteous. But I helped him put that together, yeah. Yes?
Do you have any hard rules on when you're harvesting over the winter with cold frames, like above a certain temp or?
So we never, that's a great question. We never open a cold frame unless it's above freezing. Because if you open a cold frame while it's below freezing, you're going to instantly freeze everything that's in it. So you only open the cold frame in the afternoon and with at least 2 hours of sunlight left to warm it back up after you close it. That's a great question. What else? There were more parts to that question. That was the whole answer. Okay, yes?
So do you advocate more for in-ground planting versus raised beds?
I advocate for hugelkultur. That's a whole other topic for another day.
What's it called?
Hugelkultur. But hugelkultur in Utah is done very differently than it's done in the rest of the world. So you can go type hugelkultur into Google and that doesn't work in Utah. Don't do that. Hugelkultur. It's a German word for growing lots of food without a lot of water.
So where do we learn? You teach classes on that?
I teach classes on that. My whole property is hugelkultur, yes. Where is my time person? Am I halfway through? Do I need to switch? I told her to keep me on track. because otherwise I'll start telling you about my grandchildren and how cute they are. Okay, other questions about cold frames? I'm going to move on to greenhouses. Yes? Okay, speak up.
You're going to go into it, like, I would love to know, like, if it's effective to have a greenhouse during the summer and during the winter, or just...
Okay, sit down. All right, yes. She's moved us right on to the greenhouses. So on the back side of this paper, you'll see pictures of my greenhouses, and then I want to emphasize to you that there is, how do I say this? I think this is the most important thing that we can talk about today, and that is the search for a permanent solution. Okay? There is a good, better, best, and it's good to grow in a garden. The reason, because I do property consultations all over Utah, I come to people's houses and I help them with their garden, and I can tell you for sure, because I've been doing this for years, that the number one reason that people stop gardening is because why? Because of weeds. They stop gardening because they go out there and they plant stuff, and on the weeds, it's just weeds. You need a permanent solution. So growing in your backyard garden is one answer, and then growing in a cold frame is a better answer, and then having a small greenhouse is the best answer. Because do you remember growing up, there used to be the Victory Garden TV show on PBS. Does anyone remember the Victory? Anyone? 3 of us who are in our 90s remember? We're not in our 90s. You should protest. Don't let me. And he used to say, and I loved that TV show. I was obsessed with it. I was a very weird kid. He used to say all the time, if you have $1 to spend on your garden, spend 90 cents of it improving your soil. In Utah, the best thing that you can do to improve your soil is to either have a cold frame, if that's as far as your budget will allow you to go, or to get a small greenhouse, because everything else in Utah is crap. We have the great soil in Utah for making porcelain plates. I tell everyone that our soil is spectacular for making dinner plates and not so spectacular for making dinner. Just ask the pioneers if you've read my Forgotten Skills book. I put the excerpts in there of their journal excerpts of the first and second year that they were gardening in the state of Utah. And let's just say that they were not finding that this was the place quite yet. But they worked on it. They worked on it. Did you know okay, now see, this is where we get off the subject. But I'll tell this story really quick. Within 2 months of arriving in Utah, and this is the place, Brigham Young sent a whole contingent of people to Laie, Hawaii, where they still are to this day. And my ancestors got sent to San Pete County. Due to wickedness, I guess. And they're still there. Why must we be punished through all these generations? Why wasn't I sent to Laie, Hawaii? You don't need cold frames there.
Question, I'm from Oregon, and I noticed that there's a...
Which side? The green side or the Utah brown side? The green side, okay. Then we don't want you here anymore.
I noticed here there's just like an obsession with lawns, and no offense. And I wondered how you feel about clover lawns.
Okay, we don't have time to talk about lawns because I got to teach you about this greenhouse.
I wondered if that amends the soils
If what amends the soil?
Clover.
I can't hear what she said.
Clover.
Oh, clover. Oh, yeah, have clover in your lawn. Clover fixes nitrogen. It's a legume. It fixes nitrogen in the soil. Plus, it has medicinal uses, which we could talk about, but we won't. So the best thing you can do is try to get yourself a space in Utah in which you can actually grow something that's not just your crap backyard soil, which is filled full of rocks. So that might be, I'm no-till, I'm 100% organic, I'm 100% no-till, I use hugelkultur, I have cold frames, I have greenhouses. I've been doing this my entire life. I had my first garden when I was 8 years old. My grandpa brought me for my 8th birthday. He brought me strawberry plants and a little book on how to grow strawberries, and I haven't stopped since. And When I was a student at BYU, I had a garden every year when I was a student at BYU. I had to borrow other people's property, which if you don't have property for a garden, then borrowing your neighbor's property is a great way to make friends with your neighbor and to get some land to grow yourself, and you just share with your neighbor. So no matter what your situation is, I'm blessed now because I've worked myself up. Now I have 1.5 acres of property, and I just sold my 40-acre farm. I don't, that's a whole other story. But I didn't have that much to begin with. So you need a little space where you can actually produce something for your family, and you need to spend 90 cents out of your garden dollar improving the soil so that you can actually get something out of it besides bindweed and quackgrass, which, again, are just here to remind us of the lower kingdom that we live in. That's why God invented quackgrass, is to remind you that you don't want to live in this kingdom forever. So you can see, my friend, this top center photo right here, my friend just posted this windstorm that happened last week. I only put this photo in here because this is my exact experience with hoop houses. It's about a permanent solution. They spent more, I guarantee you, they spent more money building this hoop house than it would have cost them to have me build for them a small greenhouse. They spent more money. So you have to think about a permanent solution. Don't spend any money unless you've thought of a permanent solution. Also, the greenhouses I'm building now, do you see this? I'm just bragging at this point, okay? Do you see this photo over here? Look, I'm a genius. I put a root cellar right in the floor of the greenhouse. Do you see that in this photo? Thank you. It's like pulling teeth just to get my little ego fed up here. I thought that was a genius idea. Just put the root cellar, it's deep enough. It's deep enough to keep, because it's in the greenhouse, it's deep enough to keep whatever you need all winter long. I thought that was very clever and very smart. And then here's a picture of my greenhouse in January. Here's a picture of my tomatoes taken on February 4th, the same day that this photo was taken, right here. So you can see that it does make an enormous difference. So what I want you to get out of this here today is that if you're going to spend $1 on the garden, the most important thing to do is to spend it wisely, so that you're actually getting your money's worth at the end of the day. Sit down, figure out what your goals are, figure out what your budget is, and then do a little investigation into how to use hugelkultur in Utah, do a little investigation in how to do permanently weed-free gardening, because I now have 3/4 of an acre on my property that is in garden, and you can't have 3/4 of an acre in Utah unless you know how to garden without weeds. It's just simply not possible. Yes, in the back.
So which one of your books would be the best to learn about hugelkultur?
I don't have a book about hugelkultur. You really need to kind of experience that. You have to. I don't have a book about hugelkultur.
Yeah?
Oh, I probably never have one. I mean, hugelkultur in Utah is different from the rest of the world. It's like telling I have 2 national publishers. It's like telling them, I want to write a book that only people in these 3 counties can use. They'd be like, oh, that sounds like a sound financial plan. Yes. Of course, yes. Yeah. Because people come to my house. I've had more than 6,000 people come tour our gardens in the past 7 years.
Where is your house?
It's, very straightforward, isn't she? My goodness. I'll alert my wife. I live in Alpine, just up the road from here. Yes?
Are you a permaculturist?
Of course I'm a permaculturist, yes. The other option is to be sick. You can be a permaculturist or you can be sick. I totally don't understand, because I've been doing, we can't talk about that. Anyway, you go into I shouldn't say that, any hardware store. I'm trying not to get myself in trouble here, because my friend is the owner of that hardware store. And they have cases and boxes of Roundup. It's like,
Right when you walk in.
what the heck are we doing, people? I don't get it. Like, okay, if you want to put that in your garden, then go ahead. Other questions? Yes. How can I help you with your garden questions? Let's have a free-for-all. How much time do I have left? I have 15 minutes. Okay, we got 15 minutes. I can solve all of your garden questions.
I noticed that your tomatoes are in pots.
Yes.
You have to fertilize them more than if they were in the ground.
I don't fertilize at all.
You don't?
No.
Is it the soil that you have?
Yes. Because I use compost. You can't, if you fertilize and you're using good soil, then you'll burn everything up. I don't fertilize at all.
How do you water them?
In the greenhouse, I water with a watering can. And in my 3/4 acre gardens, I use $10 oscillating sprinklers from Ace Hardware.
Where did you get your compost?
Sometimes I have Cook's Greenhouse make a custom blend for me, and I make as much of my own compost as I humanly can. And then I also have a farmer friend in Salt Lake County who owns a large horse property who brings me all of his horse droppings, and then I have my little horse who likes to also produce me some horse droppings and just whatever I can get in the back.
Those places don't have, what would you recommend we use for the compost?
What did she say?
What do you recommend if you can't acquire or make your own compost? Where can you get compost?
Well, anyone who eats can make their own compost because you have garden scrap. That's not what I'm saying. Stop. As soon as I started that sentence, I knew that is not what I was trying to say. We were not talking about the horse method of compost. But you've got vegetable scraps. I mean, if you're using vegetables, you've got vegetable scraps, and then you can put those directly into your hugelkultur. Or just go to any garden center and get peat moss. Peat moss in the United States is sustainable Canadian black peat. So it's perfectly fine to use that and put a little volcanic glass, popcorn volcanic glass, perlite or vermiculite in there and mix it with your soil. Or take a class. I don't know if that helped. Really, you need to learn how to hugelkultur, but that's a whole other subject.
What is your solution to blossom and rot? Try gypsum and tape as well.
What's my solution for what?
Blossom and rot.
Oh, blossom and rot, eggshells. Yeah. All of my, I just put the eggshells on the counter and let them dry, and then when I get enough, I just put the whole thing into the blender with some water, and then I just go put it out on the. Because, tomato plants are made out of, tomato plants get this tall, they take a huge amount of calcium. If you have blossom and rot, they just don't have enough calcium to put into the fruit. And before you ask me, I don't have pests in my garden. I don't have weeds in my garden. I don't have pests in my garden. And I have weeded for less than 2 hours this year. My 3/4 of an acre, I have weeded, did you hear that? I've weeded it for less than 2 hours this entire year on my 3/4 of an acre, and I have no weeds. And I have no pests, and that's because I don't overwater. If you have pests in your garden, you are overwatering. If you have pests in your garden, you are overwatering. Everyone is overwatering. Stop watering so much. Okay, sorry, that was a tangent. This section over here has been very quiet. So you're either asleep or, yes? Cancel. Did you hear that? That was not righteousness. You do not call yourself a failure. Shame on you. You call yourself a work in progress. Now continue on.
I have raised ones, but I think I killed more things this year and have like 3 things survive. I need like baby step where to start.
Yeah, you need to take my hugelkultur class. Yeah. Yes. Overwatering causes tomatoes to split. If your tomatoes are splitting, you are watering too much. If your tomatoes have tomato worms on them, you're watering too much. If there are aphids on all of your garden, you're watering too much. If you've got what's that horrible powdery mildew all over everything, you're watering too much. Stop watering so much. This is the desert. Stop watering.
How much should you water?
If you have hugelkultur, you water once about every 10 days, 7 to 10 days, depending on what the temperature is.
What if you just have Utah dirt?
If you have Utah dirt, then what put well, normally, the reason I'm hemming and hawing is because normally I tell people to stick their finger in. You're supposed to stick your finger in the soil, but if you try to stick your finger in the Utah dirt, it breaks your finger. Because I'm building a tree line on the east side of my property, and I go out there with the pickaxe to build the tree line, and it just bounces off. Boing! So I'm so glad that I got sent here.
Don't overwater too much on most of the food crops. Do you advise dressing vegetables and depriving the garden of water to have it done?
Do I advise, say it again.
Stressing.
Oh, stressing the garden? No, the garden gets enough stress just by virtue of being in this is the place. Gets enough stress.
How do you know whether
Water? Is that what you're asking? Well, you stick your finger in it. And if you cannot feel water at the end of your finger, then you need to water. Also, actually, probably, 10 minutes. Probably the best water test in the state of Utah is if you have squash, if you're growing squash in your garden, like pumpkins or summer squash, and it's in the heat of the garden, do you notice that they all... Yes. Like that? That's an exact picture of how they look. Anytime it gets above about 80, 85 degrees, they all start doing this. And then people start to panic. And they're, oh my gosh, my squash is dying. I gotta put water and water and water. And no matter how much you water, it doesn't matter. But if at dusk, while you can still see with your eyeballs, they're still like that, you actually need to water. If you go out at dusk and they've been looking like this all day, and if you go out at dusk and they're like this, then they were just hot. They pant. They're called panting peppos. It's a whole species thing. Don't worry about it. So, did that answer your question, or did I go off on a tangent? That answered your question. Yeah, don't stress your garden. It has enough stress.
Can you use a basement for a greenhouse with lighting?
Yes, I use lights just to start things. It's like ashwagandha, I start in lights in my house. So yes, you can do that. Just get the cheapest. I get my grow lights, any fluorescent light will do, and I just get them for free off of KSL Classified and put them up and grow.
Do you have any classes
Yes.
in the future you are currently teaching? And
I've been teaching this month. I haven't taught in a year, but I've been teaching this month, so maybe I'll teach another class. Yes.
So I want to grow everything on every corner of my property.
Oh, I like you. Let's be friends. That's the correct and righteous answer.
My husband wants to grow grass and nothing else. It's driving me crazy. Can I pay you to build
So you know the answer to this question. If your husband is bothering you, just get a new one. I'm just quoting my wife. I find this fascinating. I find this whole conversation fascinating because my wife and I, we must be dysfunctional because she never, I don't know. Like you have this conversation, like if at our house, if my wife wants to plant something, she just goes and plants it. If I want to plant something, I just go and plant it. And if I don't like it, that's just too damn bad. And if I bring it up, I will be told that another husband is probably available somewhere. So either shape up or ship out. I'm sure that wasn't the answer you were looking for, but I don't understand these marriages where it's like, oh, I can't. My husband said I can't. Well, get a new husband. In the back, yes. I better move on before I get in trouble, yes. Little House on the Prairie did not take place in Utah. I have it on good authority. That's all. I could tell you that story. I don't have time. But anyway, there are other places in the United States where you can actually grow things. I learned that as a child. I was very angry. So in Utah, we don't move our sod. We just cover it. We hugelkultur right over the sod. Don't plow into it. It's because it just makes a weedy mess. You just hugelkultur right over the top of it. Yeah. Then plant your corn that way, in the hugelkultur. Yes? Stop watering so much. She just asked, if you get squash bugs, how do you get rid of them? I thought we already covered that. Stop watering so much. Here, no, seriously, listen to this though. Bugs can I have 5 minutes. Bugs can only exist where there is some humidity. There is no humidity in the state of Utah. Just walk outside, turn into a little raisin the moment you walk out this door. And those bugs cannot live in those conditions. So if you have bugs in your garden, it's because you have provided them with a little oasis, literally in the middle of the desert. You have provided them with an oasis, and as soon as you provide them with an oasis, they're going to call all their friends, and then they're going to start having lots of children. So stop watering so much. They will go away and die if you let the top of the garden totally dry out in between every watering. The top of the garden must totally dry out in between every watering, and then you will have no pests. She's not speaking to me anymore. She's not happy with that answer. She's not speaking to me anymore. So I will now address this side of the room. Yes, back there. Yes. Yes. That is correct. Yeah. The question was, is that how I keep pests and weeds out of my greenhouse? And that is correct. Don't water so much. Yes, clear in the back.
So when you do water, how much do you put on them?
I try to put down 1.5 inches when I water. 1.5 inches of water. No, a literal, you just put a container in the garden. When it's got 1.5 inches of water in it, you're done. Put a bowl or a cup or something in the garden. When it's got 1.5 inches of water in it, you're done. Yes?
You water by hand, you have an irrigation system?
I use a $10 oscillating sprinkler from Ace Hardware. $10, Ace Hardware. Yes?
How much water do fruit trees need?
Not as much as you're giving them. Fruit trees need to be watered deeply about once every 10 days. Yeah.
So say you don't live in Utah and there is humidity where you live. How do you deal with things?
What is your address? We will all follow you home.
It's in Michigan. So how do you deal with things like flea beetles and...
Move to Utah. Next. You'll have to find some Michigan gardener. I don't help Michigan gardeners because they're not righteous enough. Yes. Speak up.
What's your thought on hydroponic gardening?
What a waste of money. What a waste of money. The most expensive lettuce you will ever eat is the hydroponic lettuce. I totally don't understand that. I do some hydroponics in my greenhouse, but I do it with a dipper. I mean, hydroponics is just using fish water to fertilize your garden. That's what hydroponics is.
Is the food even that nutritious as it would be from the ground?
No, but don't tell the hydroponic enthusiasts that. They get mad at me. They get mad at me. Behind you in the hat, yes?
Do you sell ashwagandha?
I do usually. I have a plant sale every spring, and I do usually sell ashwagandha then, yes.
Does greenhouses, is it easy for it to be humid in there, or?
Yes.
Okay, so you have to be really careful when you do it. Is it the same as in that cold?
Well, you have to be careful about how you vent the greenhouse. It's not difficult. Yeah, it's not difficult because, again, we live in Utah and it tries to suck all the humidity out. What's my time? I have 1 minute. Okay. Yes? Last? Yes.
So do you come like teach classes to a group? We have.
I might.
Okay, just work it out.
I mean, I came here, didn't I? I left my family reunion to be here. Well, and then I have one last thing to say. Go ahead.
What's the biggest mistake you've made in the last year?
In the last year?
Yes.
Or the most recent one.
Well, I think the biggest mistake always is just wasting money on things that are not a permanent solution. I regret wasting years of time. I regret being on my hands and knees for years trying to weed a garden that was never going to stay weeded. I regret that I didn't install a permanent solution in the first place and save myself all that time and money. Okay, with that said, let me say one last thing. That is that you can do this. You can garden. Even if you just plant one little thing, you can garden. I think the most important thing that you can do is to garden because it passes down to your children and your grandchildren that people garden. And right now what we're getting passed down to our children and our grandchildren is how to live beautiful lives filled full of credit card debt and how to play video games all day. That concerns me enormously. Take your children and your grandchildren out into the garden, put some raspberries out there and some strawberries. No one can resist those things. Just do a little bit of gardening. Start somewhere. Start this week. Plant something. Do something. Change.